Hey,
What's
I
up?
wanted to do a little bit more sacred geometry.
For sure.
I know we did it a couple weeks ago. I want to jump into Christ consciousness and the Lucifer experiment.
Let's do it.
You want to hear about it?
For sure.
All right. Yeah, brother. So, excuse me. Let me get my notes here. So, yeah, the first part of this sacred geometry I want to discuss is the Christ consciousness.
Okay.
So, according to Thoth or Tahuti, Thoth, whatever you guys want to call them, all levels of consciousness in the universe are integrated by a single image in sacred geometry. It is the key to time, space, and dimension, as well as consciousness itself. Thoth also said that even emotions and thoughts are based on sacred geometry. For each level of consciousness, there is an associated geometry that completely defines how that specific level of consciousness will interpret the one reality. Each level is a geometrical image or lens that spirit looks through to see the one reality, resulting in a completely unique experience. Even the spiritual hierarchy of the universe is geometrical in its structure, copying nature. According to Thoth, there are 9 crystal balls beneath the Sphinx, one inside the other. Archaeologists and psychics have been searching for these crystal balls for several years. It's an ancient legend. It is said that these crystal balls are somehow connected to the consciousness of the earth and to the 3 levels of consciousness that humans are now experiencing. Various seekers have searched for the 9 spheres, spending a great deal of time and money, but according to Thoth, you don't need the crystal balls. You just need to draw 9 concentric circles because it's just as revealing. If they'd known it was geometry and consciousness they were seeking and not necessarily an object, the knowledge would have come much easier.
Nice.
Dope, right? So basically what you do, and you guys will see this in the slide that's coming up here, is you draw 9 circles, one bigger than the other, like a bullseye. You get what I'm saying? Okay? And I'll get into what you do next, but that's how you measure the levels of consciousness. And remember, sacred geometry, feminine lines are feminine, or excuse me, curved lines are feminine. They represent feminine energy, and straight lines represent masculine. So I'll get to my point behind that in a second. So according to Thoth, if you were to approach a planet you've never seen before and wanted to know the different levels of consciousness experienced on that planet, you would take some of the little beings on that planet and measure them, assuming you can get them to hold still long enough. From those measurements, you can determine the square and circle sacred ratios connected with their bodies. And from this information, determine their exact level of consciousness. Other ratios, always derived from the cube, are used to determine the levels of consciousness in other than the human forms, such as animals, insects, and extraterrestrials. But in the case of humans, it's the circle and the square. So remember I was saying the circle? And then outside of each circle, you put a square, right? And you keep doing that. And eventually what ends up happening is you get these phi ratios because they start intersecting. So then you have the intersecting, the union, if you will, of feminine and masculine energy. And then when you get it on the phi ratio, that's where the levels of consciousness begin to emerge. Okay? And so the first level of consciousness would be where the animals are. The second would be human. And then the third level of consciousness would be the next, whatever, Christ consciousness, what we would call Christ consciousness, which would be ascending to the next spiritual level. That would be Christ consciousness. So, let me see this real quick. Let me find where I was.
You just did it 2 right there.
Huh?
So.
Circle and the square. Okay. By seeing if the square that fits around the body is bigger or smaller than the circle that goes around the body, and by exactly how much, you can determine how they interpret the reality and exactly what level of consciousness they are on. This way is fundamental to existence itself. Thoth said to draw 9 concentric circles and put a square around each one so that it fits perfectly. In this way, you have equal male and female energies. Then see how the squares interact with the circles? That's how the male energy interacts with the female energy. The key, according to Thoth, is how closely the perimeter of the square and the circumference of the circle approximate the phi ratio. This is the key to human life. It's amazing, right? So that's what they're looking for right there. And as you get closer to that ratio, the more your consciousness increases. Looking at the innermost square, no circles cross it. The same is true for the second square. The third square begins to penetrate the fourth circle, though it's obviously not a phi ratio. However, the fourth square penetrates the fifth circle in what appears to be a near perfect phi ratio. Then it comes out of phi ratio again on the fifth and sixth squares. Then the seventh square penetrates the ninth circle again in what appears to be a near perfect phi ratio. It's not one circle beyond like it did in the fourth square and the fifth circle, but two circles beyond. And it's even closer to the golden mean, the phi ratio of 1.6180339. This is the beginning of a geometrical progression that could go on forever. A progression in which we humans are only the second possible step. Using the full life of a human as the yardstick, in human history we are now at the level of consciousness represented by the development of the human zygote just after the completion of the first cell. So our level of consciousness right now, in the all the levels of consciousness, is comparative to a zygote.
We're babies. We're not even babies yet. Interesting.
Spiritually.
Right. I could see that.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah. The potential.
So you can
that leads
measure
me to believe that we are being monitored then by higher beings or beings that
absolutely.
are on a different level.
Absolutely.
Because
I
if
believe
if we're in that low of a form, then things make sense when it says that they're kind of here like protecting us or looking after us.
For sure.
Because there's an interest. They can see the potential in us if we're still embryonic in our development.
Right. Well, you wouldn't just throw your children away or kids away. They may not be your children.
Right.
But if you're looking at it from that angle, like you're a more developed being, you may be like, we're on the second level of consciousness and you're on the seventh. There's no way that you remember that. It's just like remembering a kid and empathizing with a kid when they do something silly. And you're like, man, I'm not going to get out of control and super mad at him, bro, because I was the same way. I get it. I'm going to talk to him and explain so he doesn't do it again and he learns from his mistakes.
Right.
And that's probably, I am hoping that that's what the ascended masters, the ancestors, the spirit guides, the archangels, Source itself, I hope that is how they view us. And I hope
Nibiru.
Everything.
The moon, whoever's on the moon.
The Dogon.
Man, for real.
The egg in the sky.
Uh-huh.
Did you hear me on that episode? What? During the edit when I sent you the text? And I was like, man, the egg, a shield, that thing ain't real. There was so much information in my head I couldn't even make out a sentence, bro. And I was like, man, yeah. So check it out. You can measure these things without a measuring stick by calling the radius of the innermost circle 1 unit. Thus, the first circle and first square are 2 radii across. And when you expand to the fourth square, it will be 8 radii across. To know how many radii there are around all 4 sides of the square, you simply multiply by 4 to see that 32 radii compose the perimeter of the fourth square. Say radii real fast.
I've never heard radii plural or radius plural.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Oh
I've
my
never
goodness.
heard that till today.
It's like the real crazy Jedis or the radii. You know what I'm saying? Watch out for those guys.
I thought about Raiden.
Damn.
Electrical.
We need to know the perimeter because when it equals or approximates the circumference of the circle, we have the phi ratio. According to Thoth, this represents the first time that human consciousness becomes self-aware. Rotating the second level square 45 degrees bridges the second and third levels of consciousness and approximates the perfection of the phi ratio. So the fourth square relative to the fifth circle and the seventh square relative to the ninth circle form near perfect phi ratios. Those happen to be, according to Thoth, the first and third levels of consciousness. So remember I was telling you about that? The first is animal, and the second is human, and then the third would be Christ consciousness.
Right.
Or unity consciousness, whatever some people call it.
Man, you got to say Tahuti. It sound better.
Right? So
Thoth.
Thoth, Tahuti. That's what I was saying. Yeah,
Tahuti.
I was thinking Tahuti because I was like, you guys mind? I'm gonna say Tahuti.
I'm used to Tahuti.
If you don't like Tahuti, just fill it in with Hermes.
Kiss my hootie.
They're all the same
My
guy.
Tahuti.
Yeah, they're all the same guy there. So now, if we rotate the square by 45 degrees into a diamond, the secret purpose of our existence becomes apparent. In this view, the rotated fifth square very closely approximates the location of the seventh square. It's not perfect because we are not harmonic ourselves and we do not have a perfect Christ love, but we show the way to Christ consciousness with our human love. And further, we are still connected to the first level because our geometry perfectly touches the fourth circle of the first level of consciousness. We contain the animal consciousness perfectly, and we imperfectly contain the Christ love. This is what we are, a connecting bridge. This is the key to why human consciousness is found in this particular geometric relationship and why it is necessary. Without our present way of seeing the one reality, the first level of consciousness would never be able to evolve into the higher light.
Kush and Chemtrails, the world's most dangerous podcast.